So you're not rooting for Trump like Elon Musk?
I mean, those two men deserve a special place in history.
So it's so funny because when I was listening to what you were saying, and thank you for sharing this. So Elon goes off, buys Twitter for free speech, and now he's going supporting Trump.
Yes.
What do you make of that?
At this point, I'm concerned for America. I'm very, very concerned for American voters. Who we are, what we become, the choices that we make are defined by our childhood experiences. I am the eldest daughter amongst 4 siblings. You will see a lot of those tendencies in the choices that I've made. So like wanting to fix everything, wanting to solve problems. I've done that ever since I was a kid. That my parents made, which was to send my brother to college and ask me to not go because what was the use of sending your daughter to college? It's a separate story that I decided to go and I got a scholarship and I was like, okay, if you can't do it, I'll find a way to make it happen.
How can you just get someone to think big?
I think we're all very capable of dreaming and dreaming big. Our North Star is creating as many founder success stories as we can. And we do that through many ways. We do that through capacity building. We publish a lot of research and data, which I think is a crucial piece that also blocks the flow of capital.
Indeed.
Because there is this big information black hole that founders are navigating, that investors.
Sarah Munir,
Yes.
thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm actually very excited about the conversation that we are going to have. And the reason being is because you are the enabler. You're working, enabling the upcoming wave of the entrepreneurs in the country. So you are a CEO of Invest to Innovate right now.
Yes.
So why don't you just bring us from the beginning, how it all started?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll backtrack a little bit because I think there's context in how I ended up here. By training and by the vast majority of my work experience, I'm a journalist. I've been trained as one, so I've worked at major news outlets in Pakistan, and then a bulk of my career was spent in New York. But storytelling is something that was very close to my heart, and I feel like that comes from the fact that I was a big reader as a child. I would read almost everything from like jam labels to books that I could find. And then that I feel like inadvertently that turns into you also wanting to write. So I was also a good writer. But the majority of my career was spent in that space. And not just traditional journalism. I switched gears pretty early on. So when I got out of grad school, the world was shifting. There was a big transition towards content and technology and that sweet spot of the kind of content that we were consuming, how it was coming to us, how we were reacting to it. So I was like, oh, this is interesting. So instead of whining about how people don't read the newspaper anymore, let me go work for companies where people are actually paying attention. So I worked at newsrooms, at Meta, at Twitter, and one of the key things that I realized about myself was it wasn't the platforms that attracted me. I think it's the spirit of innovation that I've always gravitated towards. And what I mean with that is I like people who take on traditional problems but look at it differently and then try to solve it differently. So fast forward a few years, I come back to Pakistan. I land here in the middle of COVID. I have no idea what's going on. The world has shifted. I have changed. And then I really had to go back to the drawing board and think about where I want to be, what I have, how those two things come together. And this was 2020. So the startup ecosystem was really picking up, not just in terms of capital, but also talent. So I saw a lot of young Pakistanis coming back, young Pakistanis in the country, doing this really cool thing. So I was like, okay, I have these skill sets. This is a space that excites me. Let me see how I can add value. So since then, I've worked with a couple of startups. I was on the founding team of a women's health and wellness startup. Health and wellness, by the way, is also very, very close to my heart, and we can get into that. And fast forward a few years, Invest to Innovate comes up. Actually, when I came back, one of the first entrepreneurship trainings that I attended was being offered by Invest to Innovate.
I see.
So the organization was always on my radar, and I was really fascinated by the fact that there was this high quality training that was being given out to entrepreneurs, first time entrepreneurs with no charge. And then some of them went on and became successful companies that raised rounds. So it was always there. And then when this opportunity came up, I was like, okay, let's take the plunge.
That is wonderful. So you said that you had an eye to actually identify the problems because in your story, when you seen that the people were shifting from reading the newspaper
Yeah.
to digitized world, you were able to see that, right? So that was sort of like a driving factor. You connecting the dots is what I'm hearing, right? So
I've never thought of it like that, but I guess it was a little bit in hindsight, maybe forward thinking, to understand that the traditional industry was going away and how can I have a head start here.
yes, yes, and I often say this myself as well. It's the compound effect of our life, the experiences that we go through since the inception makes us the people that we become. So I would be interested if you could shed some light about, like growing up, what was it like? And yeah, it'll be interesting to just go down the memory lane, to see how it all came together.
I think that's actually very, very true. So much of who we are, what we become, the choices that we make are defined by our childhood experiences. And unless you're consciously thinking about that and connecting those dots, they don't possibly come to the surface the way they should, because then it makes you more closely connected to who you are. You start to understand your choices. I am the eldest daughter amongst four siblings. You will see a lot of those tendencies in the choices that I've made. So like wanting to fix everything, wanting to solve problems. I've done that ever since I was a kid. I would say I didn't grow up in a traditionally patriarchal setup, but I feel like patriarchy is so subtly defined in so many ways in our culture, in our society, in our surroundings. So some of the things that happened early on in my life, like simple choices that my parents made, which was to send my brother to college and ask me to not go because what was the use of sending your daughter to college? It's a separate story that I decided to go, and I got a scholarship, and I was like, okay, if you can't do it, I'll find a way to make it happen. And in retrospect, I think that's an attitude that has stayed with me, where I don't ever look at others to solve problems for me, but I have this self-fulfilling belief in myself that if I have a goal and if I need to do something, I'll go out and do it, and I'll figure out a way.
I love this, right? It's like opposite to the victim mindset you would find a lot of people would have, right? That I'm going to just find the way if I put my mind to it. You just reminded me of something. I'm also an experiment child, right? I refer to the first babies, right? Because parents are figuring out how to be parents, right? And that sort of gives us that extra edge or extra conviction, I suppose. And I think there is a study, and I'm not going to just throw the number out, but the big percentage of the people who end up being CEOs are the firstborns.
Is that true?
That is a study, right? That vast majority of the CEOs will end up being that, and then there is the middle child, and this study talks about the like the younger children, what they generally tend to do. That isn't to say that they don't become CEOs, but the big percentage is there, right?
Right. That's very interesting, actually.
Yeah, and it's just something when I thought of it, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Why I have a problem with everything, or I need to make sure that that we go into the ideal world. So you said you had four, so there's four of you in total.
Yeah, in total.
And so you have a brother and then...
I have two brothers and a sister.
Two brothers and a sister.
Yeah.
Okay. So who are you close to?
I'm very close to all of them.
All of them?
Extremely close to all of them. And I think in a lot of senses, I've been an enabler for all of them as well. So a lot of the leadership stuff that lands up on your plate with like people looking at you for answers, for solutions, sometimes to fix things that they don't understand, to put things in perspective. I kind of feel like I've been doing that all my life. So it comes quite naturally to me. Not to say that I'm some kind of savior, but I think there are frameworks for looking at problems, for being solution oriented, for being overwhelmed, and then knowing, okay, now I need to move on and fix this. So I feel like as an elder sibling, and most elder siblings I feel would be able to relate to this, especially daughters.
Yes.
And if you add a layer of being Muslim, Pakistani, Desi, elder daughter, then I think these things are kind of second nature to us.
Yes. No, it is tough, and I think I would love for you to shed some light on why do you think parent thought that it was important to send a son to college, right? And daughter, there's no use. Why do you think it is the norm?
I think it's the traditional roles that we assign to genders, right? You want to invest in your male prodigy because you feel like they're the ones who are going to carry on the family name, will add to the family wealth, whereas the understanding with the daughter is that she's going to move on, she's going to get married, maybe she'll work, maybe she may not, but that's not her life's purpose. For a son, it is. And ever since I was a child, I knew that was my purpose. I think reading and having access to other realities besides what I saw around myself, because I grew up in a very traditional household, so I didn't have any female role models that I grew up dreaming of. I grew up in the early 90s, so our access to media was severely limited. Our media also tends to do massive injustice to the kind of women they show to us. So I think it was books that saved me, and they helped me dream of something different, something bigger, and then eventually work towards it.
And you just touched on this, right? This is just my thought process. I'm going to throw it out there. You ought to train mothers because that's the first school, right, for a new life, right? So being so family oriented, the way our culture is supposed to be, why do you think we are not able to see that important role in investing into like more so than boys, right? Why do you think that that's the case? Why do you think people don't see it?
I think we have to really go into like unpacking how deeply ingrained patriarchy is. So I don't think mothers by choice want to be poorly informed mothers. It's the opportunity that they were given access to while they were growing up. And they make what they could of that. So I can speak for my mother. She didn't know what I was working for or working towards, but she never blocked me. So because she didn't have the tools to actively enable me, she couldn't do that. But she didn't never block me either. And I think it's a tragedy that our mothers have so many unrealized dreams that they were never able to get to. And I think one of the biggest things that we can do moving forward, because there's no point whining over what happened, but I would like to take all of this to enable our girls to just dream, because I think that's very, very powerful. As a child, when you tell them that the world is full of possibilities versus, oh, you can't do this and you can't do that and this is what you're supposed to do, that's one of the most damaging things you can do to a young mind.
Yes. And do you think this problem is just region specific, or do you think it's other parts of the world as well, from your experience, or is it just like a different level?
I think it's more of a developing world phenomenon because there is limited resources. So we aren't growing up in an environment of abundance. And
I see.
I feel like there's scarcity, and in that scarcity there's a hierarchy, and in that women are much lower. So not to say that there isn't gender inequality in the developed world, but I don't feel like it goes down to basic choices like education. You'll find households in our country where even in nutrition, boys are given preference, sons are given preference over younger girls.
Is that true?
It's true.
Wow.
It's true. And then as you move up the income class, those choices become more sophisticated. So like in my case, it was education. In somebody else's case, it would have been something else. But there is a hierarchy, and there is a scarcity of resources. And who gets those resources is who's considered more powerful.
I feel myself, or I consider myself very lucky, right? And I feel it as well. I have these open dialogues with my parents because they are amazing to allow me to just speak my mind, right? And I think, especially with, like, if I were to talk about male per se in our society, they are basically being invested in, so the pension is taken care of, right? So they can just come back. So not only just take the family name, but now there is this extra layer of burden that you are expected, because first, when the investment was done on you,
Yeah.
you weren't given the choice whether you want that investment or not.
Right.
And now, when you finally get to the stage where you do want to have a family and you don't want to put your partner through the experiences that you would have witnessed in the society,
Yeah.
uh, you have no other choice, because now there's a guilt trip, right? Or literally, there is something that you must do, and this is how the society is designed. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't internal obligations one should look at, and I'm not saying that, as children, we don't want to look after our parents. This is the very human sort of like a nature. But that investment gets done, and then now all of a sudden the cycle gets, disturbed over there as well,
Yeah.
on the other end, because so let's say a male who is now married, the girl coming in from a different family, she might have like very sort of like, balanced, like in the family, that she was given all the right treatment. But then all of a sudden, where she's coming into, the boy wants to do this, but because of that investment that had happened when he was growing up,
Right.
now there is a challenge, right? So what do you think around that? Do you think this has anything to do with
I
that?
think it's also a lot of unnecessary pressure on men. Why, why, why should they be carrying the burden of the entire household? In my opinion, I think it defeats the basic principle of equality. Equality, it's not just a buzzword that we should throw around just to get what we want. But if we're truly living in an equitable world, that means everything is equally shared. The burden of running a household, of bringing children into the world, of raising them together, it has to be shared. And just unnecessary. And sometimes women are just better at guys at doing those things. So you're giving the wrong person the job,
Yes.
and they're not doing it as well, and then they themselves feel guilty. There's this inadvertent cycle of pressure, and which is why men in our region also face a lot of mental health issues, where they feel this constant pressure of having to be the provider, the savior, the know-it-all, and we don't have any spaces for them to openly talk about or express how they feel. And it's unfair. It's unfair on both ends, in my opinion.
Yes, and I think the point that I was building, right, is so many things I was oblivious to, right? So my wife doesn't come from Pakistan, right? So when she just sees the internal moving parts, right, and she brings a lot of fresh perspectives, because she would have studied Islam, and then she would see certain things being done in the name of Islam here. And she would be like, but well, that doesn't make sense. And then I have to now break it down that, okay, there's a difference between the religion and a culture, right? And then there are a lot of overlapping that is happening, and there is a lot of confusion. And the reason being is because very seldom the first principles are ever considered a question, right? So even what you just said, right? Why there should be a burden? I don't think I didn't know that this, but when you are married as a man, it's your family now is the first priority. You ought to look after your parents, but from a religious standpoint, now this family is your first priority, right? And because of that deal that was done when you came here, you are now, between a hard and a rock. I mean, between a rock and a hard place, right?
Yeah.
And so these are the very interesting sort of conversations, right? And I'm touching, and I'm coming back to, you mentioned word conscious. So reading books, or having that world or escape that you had, right, growing up, being able to think, or being able to develop your thinking,
Yeah.
you were able to just build that conscious frame, right? Do you think it is something that can be taught, or what can be done to actually instill that into people from a very young age?
I think reading is a no-brainer. We should all be reading. I feel like one of the biggest tragedies is losing out on so many different perspectives outside of yours that exist in the world, and learning from them, learning to coexist with them. And that's the first point of entrance into somebody else's world. And if you're if you're kind of not allowing yourself or giving yourself that opportunity, then it's just natural that you develop a lot of biases. Your thinking and your vision kind of becomes very closed ended. Your ability to ask questions is impeded because you don't know any other way. So, the point I'm trying to make is there is no way to become a critical thinker without being a reader. I also don't think that you can dream without reading. And that reading can take many forms. It could be books. Now content has changed completely. But educating yourself, I think, remains the basic principle over there. And if you're not constantly doing that, and I don't think that stops at any point in your life, because you're in new situations. You also need new frameworks. Sometimes things that served you stop serving you. Where do you get the answers? So, yeah, I think that's a non-negotiable.
Best practices of today are not going to be the best practices of tomorrow, right? And if you
Yeah.
don't have that agile mindset,
Yeah.
you're always going to leave yourself unprepared, and
Yeah.
you're not going to have the desired outcomes. It's a very powerful message there. You also touched on dreaming, right? Or even being able to think bigger.
Yeah.
And that very simple sort of, piece gets taken away.
Yeah.
You know, why do you think that happens? Or how can you just get someone to think big?
I think we're all very capable of dreaming and dreaming big. What ends up happening is that people end up blocking your ability to dream. And it comes in very simple things and simple messages that kind of get ingrained into your subconscious. So I can tell you an anecdote. I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And you know how we are all asking each other, what do you want to do when you will grow up? And somebody asked me, and even at that time, I had like some fancy vision of being at an MNC because I thought that's what success looks like.
Yes.
And this uncle very swiftly proceeded to correct me that, girls in our family don't work. And I haven't forgotten that comment till this age, because
Wow.
to block a child's dream at that age, and I'm pretty sure he was trying to be funny, or like in his head it wasn't as harmful. And we tend to do that to our kids, and especially girls, a lot. And it has, I feel like it has a multiplier effect in all the choices that we make, where we choose to go to school, what we think our life can be. And the first step to accomplishing anything is to be able to see it, to visualize it. But if that vision is blocked, then you're obviously you're not gonna shoot as far. So I don't think it's a matter of letting people dream. It's a matter of letting other people stopping them from dreaming.
Other
that
people's
big.
dogma.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. That is very powerful. And I want you to touch on one thing, right? So you mentioned that everybody has the inept capability to dream, right? I had a guest here, and they said that while they were living in Canada, right, and during their college days, they realized one thing, that the difference that they find between the people here in the region and over there is that we just say that it's not even possible.
Yeah.
It can't happen. While their starting point as a nation's DNA would be, oh, that's possible. And you might not have capabilities, right? You might have no substance,
Yeah.
but you just have that belief, right? And that's just like is driven from the society.
And that belief is that's the starting point. Once you have the belief, you acquire the tools, you hone the tools. But if at that core level, that belief is missing, you're never even going to try and look for anything else, or look for the tools or the institutions or the individuals who can enable you. And I don't mean this in a very simplistic way where just having a dream and having a belief means you've got everything, but it works the other way around, where the lack of a belief can stop you from accomplishing big things. And I feel like if you look at kids, you'll barely ever come across a child who won't have some grand dream of becoming an astronaut or a
That is
scientist.
true.
No one will ever say, I don't want to do anything.
Yes.
But it's over time, as they get conditioned, as they hear all these messages from society, those dreams start to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then they get boxed into something that they believe is possible. Whereas
Yes.
we need to open up that box and make them think of, okay, think of what else is possible.
Yes. Vast majority of the people actually go through this here, right? Because you said that there is a survival sort of a mode and there is just hierarchy that is defined, and then everybody is just never have the time to just zoom out, right? Very few
Yeah.
lucky ones get to do that. Now, working in that kind of environment and then providing the services and guidance to the entrepreneurs who might not have that sort of like, dream big mentality, how do you tackle that? Or do you come across that when you are working with the aspiring founders or early stage founders?
It's the other way around. I think it's their. What I love about founders and working with founders is their ability to dream. And they're often dreaming of things that are utterly impossible. Sometimes markets don't exist or the conditions don't exist. And then if you place somebody in Pakistan, they're against like a million odds. But they continue to chase that vision, that purpose, which I find very, very energizing. Uh, how my experience comes in handy is because of everything that I've done myself or seen or the way I've grown up. And I give my journalism background a lot of credit for this, is that I've developed a lot of empathy and a lot of curiosity. So sometimes getting these founders to the core why of their business, right? Like that's the biggest service that you can do. A business is a composition of multitudes. You have your ops, you have your, business fundamentals, marketing. But if most founders or a vast majority, especially early stage, they're so bogged down but by all of these operational and logistical expectations that they kind of lose touch with the core why. And that's when you start to make mistakes, right? You're trying to do too much of everything, you don't have a clear direction, you're running out of money. And bringing them back to their why, I feel like that's the most powerful thing for me to be able to witness or to be able to do. And in service of what they're doing, that's also essentially one of the core elements that any founders need to remain very closely connected to, because as your business grows, there'll be a million pressures pulling you in different directions, and your basics, your why has to be very clear.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think if I were to just, rephrase what you're saying or just explain what I'm thinking when you say this is, you work in the business, but sometimes there are a lot of moving parts or there are a lot of things that are happening that you you lose the touch of working on the business, right?
Yeah.
And then that working on the business has to be driven from your why.
Yeah.
That why do you exist to begin with? Otherwise, the given problem can really suck you in, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then having the support that you're talking about, that being able to add that value to the founders,
Yeah.
it literally bringing them back, like to, okay, make sure that you don't you don't take your eyes off the course, right?
Right.
Yes. And before I talk about that health and wellness, which is close to your heart, you mentioned, how did you get your scholarship? What was that journey like? I would love to hear that.
So I got the Fulbright scholarship. I went to Columbia on the Fulbright scholarship. Honestly, I don't remember how I found out about it, because at that time it was a really small program. Very select few people got it. I feel like I've been very privileged to be in good institutions, and in the company of good people who've opened up opportunities for me, and then what you make of them is on you.
Yes.
Right? So people can only guide you to certain things or alert you to certain things, but then what you end up doing with that is on you. So I've been very good at, and I think I just was so hungry, right? Anything that could get me to my goal, I was doing it. And there's a few instances in my life where uh, anybody, and even me myself, when I look back and I'm like, I don't know how I did that. I don't know how I just moved to another country and figured out a career for myself. I had nothing but $3,000, no work visa, nothing. I just knew I wanted to make it in an international market. I wanted to be a global talent. And I found a way and I did it. Same thing with the Fulbright. So I think it's grit. It's grit, it's clarity, and it's chasing a goal and being energized by that chase. So for me, it's never been an ego thing. It's never been, oh, I'll show you. It's just that I'm truly passionate about the things that I chase, and then I'm very energized by when I get there. So it never feels like draining or exhausting. I mean, you have your tough moments, but everyone does.
Yeah.
But I think it's the journey that makes it so valuable.
It's the resourcefulness is what was ringing in the back of my head when you were talking about it, right?
Yeah, that's a very commercial way of putting it, but
Yeah,
yes.
no, but you see, when you think about it, that if you are resourceful, that you will always have an option.
Right.
And as an entrepreneur, as in someone who is actually chasing an opportunity beyond the control of the means,
Yeah.
you ought to have that as the first building block, right? And if you don't have this, you're always going to be relying on others to sort of, like make path clear for you kind of thing, right?
Right. I think it's thinking outside the box. So there's
Yes.
multiple ways of getting to a goal. Going to college could have happened in multiple ways. Somebody could have paid for my education, my parents could have funded me, but I knew plan A wasn't working, so I had a plan B.
Yes.
Had plan B not worked, I would have had a plan C. And then finding people who can support that plan B and plan C, and yeah, it requires. I think hustle is the right word.
Yes, yes.
It's there in my DNA.
Yes, yes. And I just love it. And I can see that, last time when I met you, today is the energy as well, right? You know that, okay, I know what I want. I'm going to find the way. I may not have all the answers, but I'll get there.
I'll get there, yeah.
Because I have done it. And that's what the connections you have in your mind, right? So, when we are working with the startups, right?
Yeah.
And you have someone who actually want to do a lot, right? And you can see that that's only going to lead them to just spreading themselves really thin. How do you handle these kind of situations?
That's actually one of the hardest things to do, because there's risks to scaling someone's ambition as well, right? So it has to be done very strategically, and I find that the most effective way of doing that is bringing them back to their goal, and leading them to realize everything else that they're doing, which is unnecessary at this point or not directly connected to their core mission. And you can use different frameworks. You can show them their product roadmap. You can show them their 6-year financial forecast. And we try a few things with some founders, just seeing their financial runway and knowing that they have to make tough choices and come back to what they initially set out to do is enough. For others, it's a deeper conversation. And it also goes back to why somebody is building that business in the first place, right? For some people, it's very personal. For some people, it's something that's inherited. Others have just picked up on a problem and have been in that space and think that they'll be good at it. So I feel like people who are very close to the problem on a personal level, it's harder with them, because there is that emotional interconnectedness as well. These are usually impact businesses where it's also hard to argue what's good to do and what's not good to
Yes.
do, right? Because everything's good to do when it comes to impact. In more commercial businesses, those things are a bit easier, and I think making their growth plans, showing them what's the best use of their money, what's the best use of their time. More importantly, a founder's bandwidth. Those things tend to get them to the finish line.
Yes, and often I say this, that you ought to love the problem, right? And that causes pain as well, because when you're loving the problem, but the thin line, there is a very, very fine line, right? Is that there is a confusion I have experienced in founders that the love gets switched from the problem to the solution. And
Yeah.
most of the problems are stemming from the love of the solution now as to the love of the problem. Going back to what you were just saying, right?
Yeah.
Is the hustle, is the process which keeps you excited, is the enjoyment is there, right? So when you know that, okay, you have identified a problem which is close to the heart,
Yeah.
and you love the problem and the people you are solving the problem for, and if you don't have the guidance or the mentors or the people who are there to support the ecosystem in your journey, you can switch that love to the solution and still believe that you are in love with the problem.
Yeah. There's another way of keeping yourself on track, which I personally think is very important, is to keep talking to your end user. Yes, sometimes businesses are born out of your perception of a problem, but they can be solved in many different ways. What might seem most valuable or most efficient to you might not be the right fit for the user. So keep going back to the user, keep talking to them, because they keep you grounded in a way that even an external mentor can't, right? It's the person who's benefiting or paying for your product or your service. They're the most important stakeholder. So hear from them and then make decisions accordingly. And the smartest founders do that on a very granular level. That's one common thing that I've noticed.
That's really powerful. And how was your journey like when you were involved in that startup?
It was really good. It taught me a lot in terms of just, and I don't come from a business background. I've never run a business. But because of it was a women founded, women led team, so there was a lot of room to make mistakes. And I think that was really empowering for me at that point. And that it was also a startup that was born out of COVID, and then COVID ended, so there needed to be a shift in what we thought the solution was, how we thought people's habits or consumption of fitness or wellness would look like. But we quickly realized that once COVID is done, people value communities. They need something that's omni-channel. It's never going to be online or offline. So there was a big pivot that was required. And that pivot can't come until you're very clear on, okay, am I solving the problem that I set out to solve? And is this the best way to solve it? Like those were the two questions that we had to answer. And in those situations, going back to our users, understanding what their core issues were, what the best way of solving those were, what was the price point that they could, because this was a solution for women by women. And in Pakistan, wellness or health is a very small fraction of your budget. And then women also don't have the financial agency to pay for their own health or wellness solution. So like you can't charge them a ridiculous amount. So how do we make something that they can afford while we still turn a profit? So it taught me a lot of basic business fundamentals, right? There's no point of hyper growth until you have figured out how you can run a business sustainably. There's no point in going out and raising rounds and rounds of funding unless you've done the basics of, okay, this is what I make, this is who pays for it, this is how much they want to pay for it. Until that work is done, building anything on top of it with however amount of money is useless, because it's going to come down.
Very good. And what was that solution?
So we pivoted from an online platform to creating to going back to our offline studios.
Okay.
And even that, after COVID, getting people back in with like all these new fears that they had around safety, around hygiene, around proximity, getting that back to a profitable level, and then using that model now to franchise and expand across Pakistan instead of just being focused on a digital solution, because the world had shifted, and it had shifted back, which we didn't see coming.
So it's still going, but you're not a part of it.
It's still going. It's doing very well. I'm a cheerleader. I'm just not a part of it.
That's amazing, and
Yeah.
being in the trenches teaches you a lot, right? So
So
there's
much, so
so much
much.
that you don't even understand what could go wrong or what could go right. Providing if you had to make a decision, what would you do? So you mentioned that health and wellness is close to your heart. I would love to hear more about that.
It's been a journey on that front as well. I feel like it's this, I don't know what the best way to frame this is, but um, I think it's this constant um, hunger for a goal. That's how it started. And then I noticed the impact of like being outdoor, being active. I started running, started lifting, and I saw a very clear shift in my mental health. So even though I was doing it initially for aesthetic reasons, I was like, okay, so this is not even what you get out of it. There's something much bigger here. And I don't think that happens in the first 3 to 6 months. Like there's a mind body connection that people allude to, which sounds like a lot of BS when you start out. But you, like any other thing, there's a breakthrough that happens, and it only comes once you're consistent and you keep going in. So for me, because I wasn't an active child while growing up, I don't think sports were a thing. Sports for girls was definitely not a thing. So yeah, here and there, but never really into competitive sport. And I think that was an itch that I had in me. And then when I do something, I tend to do it the whole 9 yards. So within a year of starting running, I signed up for a marathon. I went and I ran a marathon.
Amazing.
I do compete in a lot of local competitions as well. I'm planning to do one in Madrid, Barcelona next year. So I think it's this constant desire for excellence and doing new things and challenging myself and then overcoming it. That's what drives me. And then there's a lot of literature and research that proves that when you do hard things with your body, you're essentially getting conditioned to doing hard things outside of the gym, outside of those physical spaces. I believe it's called neuroplasticity, where your brain starts to expand and it becomes more comfortable. So I saw that translating into other parts of my life, and I was like, this is a superpower. I'm just going to stick to it.
Yes, and you touched on a topic which is very close to my heart as well, and I'm very open and loud about it. Mental illness is something that I grew up with. My mother suffers with bipolar disorder, and that has taught me a lot of things. And when I do look at in retrospect, right, staying active and like doing all of those things can take away the need for the medication that gets administered, especially in the developing countries, right? So that level of switch can make a world of a difference as well.
Also, being outdoor. I
Yeah.
think growing up in Karachi, I feel like public spaces or outdoor spaces were never that accessible. So until COVID hit, I don't think any of us ever knew what stepping out or slowing down or looking at the sunset could actually do to your nervous system.
Yes.
And it calms you down, it grounds you. There is so much medical evidence that proves it. So to your point, we can either be taking antidepressants or using other ways to distract ourselves or to slow ourselves down. But why not do this instead?
Yes, yes. Very, very powerful message there. So thank you for that. Now, before I ask about your role and your challenges and your roadmap, I would love to hear a little bit more about your journalism journey, right? That how you got in there, what were the peaks and what were the lows that you would have experienced and how you navigated through those.
I landed into journalism by accident. I was an economics major, so there was no reason for me to be at a news channel. But I feel like life has its way. And I worked at almost all of the leading publications in Pakistan, and seen a lot because these were the early 2000, no, 2010 to 2015, which were some very, very rough years security wise for the country. So being that close to all of that, understanding our geopolitical position in the world, its impact at home. So you were asking about the highs and the lows. I think one of my toughest days in that industry was the APS attack. I don't think I've ever forgotten about that day. It just left a mark on me, and it made me realize what newsrooms were up against, right? Because it was happening and we were covering it in real time, and there was just no space to process your emotions. I remember that day when I got home, I like completely fell apart because I just couldn't believe what I had witnessed, and the fact that we had reported on it all day. So I think if I was to put down the hardest day, I think that would be it. Then I also worked in American newsrooms during the Trump presidency. And I was the only Muslim immigrant woman of color covering Trump at that time. And I was in the Twitter newsroom. And if you remember, Trump used to use Twitter very, very obsessively, I would
I
say.
do remember that, yes.
And
Got
he
him
would
into a lot of
wake up,
trouble.
yeah, and he would wake up and he would start tweeting at 7 a.m. And I was on the 6 a.m. shift. So inadvertently, all of those stories came to me, and I was just over time became fascinated by him. Not in any positive way, but I was just my mind kind of broke. I was like, we look at the U.S. As this representation of the free world and free speech, and here you have the leader of the free world tweeting complete nonsense with no regard for foreign policy implications, no regard for legal implications, and somehow it was our job to make sense of it in a non-biased, impartial way, which was very, very tough when the president is talking nonsense. But I feel like it taught me a lot. It taught me how to think on my feet, how to understand that politics is essentially pretty similar everywhere. It's a lot of ego, it's a lot of misplaced power, it's a lot of money just moving around, and people just mimicking policy stances or party stances with no real regard for their voter base, with no real regard for its actual impact on the ground. And also how technology had changed the landscape completely. So previously, a president would come out and give a press release, and it would be vetted, and then it would go out to the public. And here, within seconds, he could say anything, and it would be accessible to anybody on the platform. And not everyone has the sense or the critical thinking to read between the lines, to do any kind of fact checking. Like he did, he spread a lot of misinformation, which most voters took at face value. So it taught me how these tools can have become much bigger than what they were intended to be, and that their influence continues to grow. And at the same time, I also saw movements like the BLM movement that was entirely shaped over Twitter. Communities were mobilized over the platform. The Me Too movement, that was catalyzed over the platform. And we had a very big role in covering it and making sure all those voices were not going undiscovered. So the same tool, same platform, just being used so differently and having such different implications. I think it just gave me a different view on how the same tools can be used very differently and it depends on the intentions of the user and who has access to it.
So you're not rooting for Trump like Elon Musk?
I mean, those two men deserve a special place in history.
So it's so funny because when I was listening to what you were saying, and thank you for sharing this. So Elon goes off, buys Twitter for free speech, and now he's going supporting
Trump. Yes.
What do you make of that?
I have honestly kind of, at this point, I'm concerned for America. I'm very, very concerned for American voters, because I know that for most reasonable humanitarian Americans, neither of those choices are a good one. You have Kamala on one hand, who has all these problematic stances on what's happening in Palestine and the US's role on it, and then you have Trump, who's a walking disaster. So I genuinely feel really bad for my friends back in the US who somehow want to do their civic duty, they want to participate in the election, but these are your choices, and I don't know how we ended up back here, because it's not like it wasn't Trump's presidency was not something that happened in the early 60s, where so much was left unreported or people didn't have access to information. Everything came out. The charges against him came out during his first campaign, and yet he got elected. And now there is a second very real chance of him coming to office. So yeah, I'm just very concerned at this point.
Do you know, one of the things I don't know if I should give Trump the credit for, but being able to just speak your mind and saying that this is the side I belong to or this is what I believe in, that's sort of waiting to happen. So there were a lot of things that people were thinking or living for a long time, but because of the being politically correct, it wasn't a thing. But then Trump comes and he just goes what you just talked about, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden everybody's like, well, I can express myself as well, and I'm going to express what my beliefs are, right? And
But
then
should you?
and this is what I mean, right? So my one thought that I always say, right, is that if you don't know your why, if you don't know why you exist, what you believe in, you're always going to be confused, right? And then if you, at times when you must express what you need to express, right, you must, talk about something that if you don't, might never have any chance to change. What do you do in that scenario?
I think people tend to use free speech very recklessly. The principle of free speech is not just to say whatever is on your mind. The moral considerations, the human considerations, the political considerations, the foreign policy considerations in his case, all of those are things that need to be thought through before you put out statements, and that's obviously on a very leadership level. But even if it's you and me, just because we have the liberty of free speech doesn't mean that I can say things that are offensive, that are morally corrupt, that are intrinsically inconsiderate of somebody else's feelings. So I don't think it's not a permission slip to just be a complete, I don't want to curse, but there's certain moral, legal considerations that should be kept in mind if you want to be taken seriously and if you want to have any kind of a real impact.
Just the other day, and I think you just put it very nicely, right? And I just wanted to hear that from you, right? Because you see, one of the most powerful tools a human possess is the power of his speech, right?
Yeah.
World War II, as we know, right? It was the oratory skills. So the world we live in now is that fundamentally on a thought level, on the inception level, we are not conscious. So whenever we open our mouth, either we are gossiping, we are judging, we are complaining, we are lying, we are, putting our dogmas onto other people. So we are not using this tool as the power it's supposed to have. And then we do it in the environment. So Twitter is not the environment that where you're going to just go and, like your dumb tweet, you're just, just throwing it out there, right? And then we wonder that why we are not getting people to do what we want, or why people are not listening, or we are not even consciously thinking about its impact at a larger scale, what you just talked about, right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of like a world we live in, right? This is an access, even the smallest of the youngest child, that I have in my family would be handed a smartphone. So today it's a cartoon, right? Then it's going to be something else, right? So that's the world we live in. So how do you practically sort of go about, like if you're a parent or if you are just even someone who wants to be conscious about what you just talked about?
I think ethical media consumption is a real thing. It's a real practice that we should embody because a you like there's just too much information out there to make sense out of for an average human mind. We're constantly bombarded with visuals, with opinions, with news pieces, tweets. So for a human mind to make sense of so much content is essentially impossible. And in most cases, we also don't even look for the sources. So it's all incoming and it's all getting absorbed in different parts of our body. And that's why we're all always on edge because all of these things leave a mark on you. So I always advocate for ethical media consumption, which is simple practices like checking your sources, um, cross referencing any piece of information before you pass it on to somebody else, not engaging in activism anonymously because that tends to lead to behavior that you will not be comfortable putting up if your name was attached to it. So if you have an opinion, if you have a stance, either do it with your full identity on display. Don't go out on these rampages because it serves no purpose and tends to encourage things and practices that people feel like they'll get away with because they don't have an identity attached to it. And then follow the money, right? Even for the media organizations that you're following, critically question who's funding them, why they have the opinions that they do, why do you endorse the opinions that they're showing to you, how much of it do you really agree with, and then seek out a diversity of opinions. So just because you've been reading X number of publications does not mean that that needs to be a lifetime practice. Use this abundance of information to your advantage. So even with your news appetite, make sure you're reading different perspectives. That's on you. Nobody else is going to come and teach that to you. And then also make sure you have real life interactions because, yes, this digital world is great. It gives us a lot of access. But the algorithm is also very, very powerful. It tends to trap you into these echo chambers, which are very scary and very precise and very dangerous. So go out and have real life interactions. Supplement that with your digital access, but one can't replace the other. And these are things that we have to take responsibility for as consumers, as ethical media consumers.
What an educational piece you just shared with us, right? That's just like really, really important
Yeah.
for your mental diet, right?
Yes.
Because it's equally important. And if you are just consuming all of this, yeah,
Junk. In most cases, it's just junk, and then the algorithm is following you and it's feeding you more of that junk until you start to believe that this is a
Yeah.
universally applicable principle, whereas it's not.
yeah, yeah.
It's just everything that algorithm is feeding you, and it's a very dangerous, I feel like, rabbit hole to fall into, especially for younger people
Yes.
who are just starting to develop their views on the world, their own politics. It's very important to have access to diverse opinions, diverse perspectives, and it can't just come from these tools.
Yes, and you just reminded me of that Netflix series I watched, The Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
that was very educational for me as well. I was
Yes.
like, wow, how it happens. And to be honest, we just talked about the power of the thought that something has to be manifested, or at least like that you've thought of it before you can make it a reality. And if your mental diet is all junk, and
Yeah.
if there is no refinement, sort of like a process or a framework in place,
Yeah.
and then you're going off making decisions, even as a founder or as an individual who is responsible for family or anything responsible, there is a big challenge, right? So it's all kind of comes, like ties together.
Yeah.
And you said follow the money, so economy, right? You said that that we both share this belief, right? Is that economic activities, if you increase them, if you have the productivity growth, your nation ultimately can sort of be of value or service to the world and to the people. And then that is driven by the startup founder mode that we have been talking about recently, right? And then basically you are driving that engine forward. For that, you need to have the work the kind of work that Invest to Innovate is doing, right, and what we are doing at UPitch Live. So I would love to hear your roadmap and how you're looking to tackle this role that you are in, and what are the top priority for the Pakistan's market, and then if there are any plans beyond, what are you thinking?
So I feel, and I don't think it's any secret, that Pakistan is in a tough space. There's a lot of odds that are stacked against us, but there are also certain facts that remain true. We're the fifth most populous country in the world. More than 70% of our youth is under the age of 30. We're also one of the most hyper-connected nations in the region. So there is an immense amount of economic opportunity that exists here. You have a big consumer base, and you have a lot of core issues that have not been solved by traditional players and not by the state. So there's a lot of opportunity in terms of solving these key problems that impact a large population base, which means you have a very big target market, and do it in a way that leads to impact, but also has commercial success tied to it. So I genuinely believe that if we talk about economic freedom for our youth, and especially if we take a gender lens on it, entrepreneurship has a very, very big role to play over there, because you are going to be building local solutions for very local problems, which tend to have a very different impact as opposed to somebody else coming in, bringing in a solution, and then you trying to work yourself around it. So in terms of Invest to Innovate's vision, our North Star is creating as many founder success stories as we can. And we do that through many ways. We do that through capacity building. We publish a lot of research and data, which I think is a crucial piece that also blocks the flow of capital.
Indeed.
Because there is this big information black hole that founders are navigating, that investors want to get into, but they just don't know where to start. So data is a very big piece. And then opening doors for them, which means very simple things like connecting them to experts who've walked the path before them, connecting them to investors that might be able to help bridge that funding gap. And then connecting them to each other. So peer learning, building partnerships. That's really our mandate. I don't think that's going to change in the coming years, because even if you just narrow down entrepreneurship to just the startup landscape, we had this big, J curve where there was this big boom in funding in 2022, 2021, and now it's kind of flattening out. So we see that as stability, as the market maturing. And it's kind of a natural selection process. The founders that have managed to stay and that continue to build, they're building businesses that know their fundamentals. So they're not just chasing some hockey stick growth curve. They understand that unless you figure out a basic revenue model, you understand your customer base, you have your pricing right, you have your market sizing accurate, there is no point piling money on top of it. So I think it's kind of clearing the path for more seasoned, more mature founders who are in it for the long game and not just following some fad. That kind of became the case in the middle somewhere.
And so there is an investment wing which is independent, independent, but so that you create the basically funnel and you prepare them for the funnel, and then you provide them with the funnel, and then invite others to come and join as well. You know, so that's a really sort of powerful and much needed. And if it's data driven, that sort of fills the gap to build the meaningful ecosystem, or the ecosystem in its true essence, which is still at a very early stages in Pakistan. If this is just my primary research, I would love to hear your thought. Is that the case?
I think there's a lot of opportunity here. And you're correct. It's in its very early stages. It's going to take many, many ways while we can even call it like, I think we're reasonably mature now. We just had our initial teething problems, which was the past year and a half. And if you've been following the news, things are changing. And there's a lot of businesses that are now taking a regional lens on their businesses and then raising
Yeah.
funds on top of that. That's what Pakistan needs. We need we need founders that have a bigger vision. So build local solutions, but have a global vision so that you're able to expand regionally. You're able to kind of mitigate those risks a little bit that come with our currency risk, with our political instability, with our macroeconomic realities. So yeah, I feel like data driven data driven capital flow, so that it's going to the right places, looking at the right benchmarks, and then focusing on industries that the country truly needs. So I feel like agri-tech is still a big space. Health, education. Education, I feel like we've maybe saturated a little bit, but agriculture and then looking at sustainability, climate, we've barely scratched the surface with those things. So we're just now seeing the money starting to come in. And how do the businesses respond to it? What kind of businesses come out of it? What kind of businesses grow because of that capital? I think that's where the fun part lies.
Yes, and you've been very, very good. Thank you for sharing all the wisdom that you have today. And before we wrap up, right, I have two questions. It's a one question, but it has two
Okay.
sort of, tongues coming out of it, right? So the first is that Pakistan has its specific, but Pakistan particular problems, right? So in an ideal world, what would you like Pakistan to sort of allow founders and people, or the community per se of the startup ecosystem to have, right? Whether it's policy, whether it's the mindset, whether it's the infrastructure. And the second part is that what is the piece of advice you would give to the aspiring founders or the founders who are tackling these times, and what do you sort of vision in coming, let's say, 10 to 15 years?
Uh, in terms of an ideal world where founders can just focus on building, we need to remove blockers like all of the policy loopholes that we make them climb through. And it's a lot of things, from the time you have to go and register your company to the taxes that you're subjected to, how volatile those taxation brackets are, how cumbersome that entire process is. And then the infrastructure, right? Like we do a lot of lip service to digital transformation, but we've all seen what's been happening with the internet blockages, and it's not a one-off thing. I feel like this past entire year has really taken us many steps back in terms of the PR that Pakistan has on a global front. There's concern from global investors. There's concern from global partners, on what this means for the country. If this is something that's going to continue, if not, what's the timeline? And we don't have any answers. So you can't be boasting about being the tech hub, or being the champions of innovation, and then blocking your entrepreneurs on such a basic level. So create a level playing field for them, and then see what they're capable of. And then for the founders, I would just want to be honest with them that this is not an easy market. Being an entrepreneur is not easy. It's a very romanticized and glamorized term, and it's becoming really more so. I think it's with all the money that's following it. I think it's becoming even cooler to be an entrepreneur now. But it's not easy work. So come in with the right expectations and commit to it for the long game, because it's not a quick return, easy buck turnaround. A good sustainable business takes many, many years to build. It takes many forms, many directions, and you grow with it. So if it's something that you care about deeply and can commit to for a long time, only then do it. And then know that you're operating in a tougher market. So be kind to yourself. Allow yourself some grace. A lot of the problems that founders get stuck with are outside of their control, and they continue to push forward. Sometimes I don't know how, but they continue to do that. So it's important to recognize it, voice it, and give them credit for what they're up against.
you just said what we say in a way that we say that unleashing the Phoenix era, and it really applies to Pakistan, because when you think about the mythical creature Phoenix, right? You're
Yeah.
saying that you're going to go into the ashes, you're going to burn to the
then
ashes,
you're-
then you're going
Quite
to
literally.
then to literally rise from it, right?
Yeah.
So this is very relevant, and thank
Yeah.
you for this powerful message, and the whole conversation was very enjoyable.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah Munir, and and thank you. And anything, like I said, in the ecosystem that we can add value to, we are always here. And with your wisdom and level of calm and everything else, entrepreneurs are in great hands. So that's just amazing. So thank you for being very kind with your time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.